Welcome to the Relationship Diversity Podcast, where we celebrate, question, and explore all aspects of relationship structure diversity, from soloamory to monogamy to polyamory and everything in between, because every relationship is as unique as you are. We'll bust through societal programming to break open and dissect everything we thought we knew about relationships, to ask the challenging but transformational questions: who am I, and what do I really want in my relationships? I'm your guide, Carrie Jaroslaw, best-selling author, speaker, intuitive, and coach. Join me as we reimagine all that our most intimate relationships can become. Today's episode is part of our Conversations series. I am just one voice in this relationship diversity movement, and it's important to bring more unique perspectives into the conversation. Today, I'll be talking with Elana Israel about her relationship experience and her conscious choice to embrace the relationship structure of soloamory at this moment in her life. Here's a little about her. Former therapist turned relationship coach, Elana is the creator of Partnership Aligned podcast. In her one-to-one coaching program, she helps moms with little kids learn how to regulate their emotions and become communicating pros so that they feel happier and more connected with their partner. Elana learned firsthand in her own marriage that you can be emotionally free no matter what your partner says or does. Now she uses her professional and personal experience to help women align with themselves and then with their partner. Now let's get into the conversation. Hello, everyone. And here is my first interview with Elana Israel. I am so happy to have you here. Elana and I connected. She reached out to me, and our first talk was like, oh my gosh, my long lost soul sister. We just connected on so many levels, and she has an incredible podcast called Partnership Aligned, which I had the honor of being a guest on. And as I was talking more with her, she was expressing to me how she is in a space in her life where she has chosen to practice what I call soloamory. And so soloamory, I define as the most intimate relationship is with yourself. And that is the relationship structure that you are consciously and intentionally choosing in this moment. And so she was expressing to me that she's been through different relationships. And right now, what she was choosing to focus on was the relationship with herself. And I thought, well, this is perfect. I am so excited to talk more and learn more about her story and how she practices soloamory. So first off, Elana, welcome to Relationship Diversity Podcast. I'm so happy you're here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. This is fun.
Yeah, I know. I get to put you on the other side. It's fun.
I know. It's so fun to be on someone else's podcast. That's great.
Right. So I wanted to start off with you just telling the people who are listening more about what you're practicing right now, how you look at, soloamory is also talked about as the single life, right? I'm choosing to be single. And I think that different societal and cultural programming has told us that that's bad in some way, or, the idea of someone choosing to be single, that there must be something wrong with them or whatever. But I actually feel like you have chosen it very consciously and purposefully. And so I'd love for you to just talk maybe a little bit about how you're practicing it and the decision maybe of why you decided to go into that structure.
Yeah, it is a very conscious decision. So I've been in a lot of relationships. Most of them were very healthy. My marriage was not. And I actually made the conscious decision while I was still with my husband. we were in a difficult situation. There was addiction was in the picture. We had a baby. There was a lot going on. And my emotional state very much depended on what was going on with him. And, which is codependency at its core. And that was not working for me in terms of my inner peace. And I was a new mom, and I knew when you become a mom, there's something within you that starts looking at things in a different way.
So true.
Yeah. And so one day, my husband and I got into a huge fight because one of the ways that he had a lot of addictions, and one of the ways that he was staying sober from drugs and alcohol was to play video games all night long. And it was driving me up the wall. And we would have big fights about this. I mean, all night long. So we would just fight about it and fight about it. And one day we got into this huge fight. And my baby was in that phase where he would only take a nap in the car. We've all been there.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I threw him in the car seat, and I went for a drive. And I am a member of AA. I had gone to an AA meeting earlier that week, and I was sharing about what was going on in my marriage. And this woman came up to me after the meeting, and she said, "Have you ever heard of Jody Moore?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, this isn't really recovery related, but she's a life coach, and she talks about, marriage in a way that I've never heard before. And after hearing you share, I really think it would be helpful." So I'm a seeker. If you tell me, this book might help, this podcast might help, I will listen, I will read. It's one of my favorite things about myself, actually, is that I'm willing to seek. Yeah. So I got in the car and I was like, well, this is a perfect time to listen to that podcast. And I did. And on this particular one, this woman, Jody Moore, she has a guest on, Brooke Castillo, who ended up being my teacher. And they are talking about marriage in a different way. Instead of talking about it in date nights and sex and communication and all of that. Not that that stuff isn't important. It totally is. They were talking about taking ownership for your own emotions and not putting your emotional state on a silver platter and handing it over to your spouse.
Ooh, yeah.
And I don't remember exactly what was said anymore in that podcast, but I remember that I had a spiritual experience. It was a 35-minute podcast. And when I came back to the house, remember, I just went for a drive with the baby. It's not like I went away for the weekend. When I came back to the house, I felt totally different about the whole thing. I had released him.
Wow.
And I walked into the bedroom. He was resting or hanging out in bed. And I just said to him, "You know what? Play the video games. Do whatever it is that you need to do. I release you." I think I actually may have said the words, "I release you." And in that moment, that felt so good to me that I made the decision that I was really going to focus on my emotional life, myself. And I was not honoring myself in that marriage. I was abandoning myself in the sense that I was not saying how I was really feeling about things for long periods of time. And then I couldn't take it anymore. And then I would tell him how I felt about things. But at this point, I was erupting, right? So it was I'm not sharing how I'm feeling at all. I'm suppressing it. And then eventually I am going to share with you how I feel, but now it's going to come out almost emotionally abusive, or verbally abusive. So, because we talked about on my podcast, when you came on, it was pushing that beach ball underwater.
Right.
I was pushing it down. "Oh, it's fine if you play video games, babe. I really want it to be the cool wife, It's fine that you play video games. It's okay. I'm glad you found something you love." In my head, I would tell myself he's not out all night. He's home. I know where he is, and I would just, not talk about how I felt. And then it would get to and I would stew in resentment and stew in resentment and stew in resentment. And then eventually I would say how I felt. and it would just erupt and it would be an attack, which
Mhm.
of course didn't work either. And so I just decided in that moment, like, man, it feels so good to release this expectation because I know he's not going to fulfill it. We've been trying. And so I'm just
Mhm.
going to let that go and just take the energy that I'm spending trying to change him and focus that energy inward. And it felt so aligned. It felt so good that I said, this is what I'm doing from now on.
Oh, that gives me the chills because it's the difference how I talk about an unconscious or a conscious relationship, because the unconscious is you need to change to make me feel better. The
Yes.
conscious part says, no, I'm going to take back the power, empower myself to look at what's going on within me and know that that's where the fundamental changes come from, right? And
Yeah.
so I do feel like you said, you started that practice in your marriage, that reclaiming of, the reclamation of your, I guess, like sovereignty in terms of your emotional state is part of the practice of soloamory. So how did that move from that moment of releasing him and taking ownership of your emotions to you moving through the marriage and then choosing to be more autonomous in other areas of your life?
Um, I just continued listening more and more to this woman's podcast and then found out who her teacher was, listened to that. I just really started seeking this new way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that I've heard other teachers say it in different ways. I think we're all kind of saying a lot of the same things in different ways, but sometimes you just hear it a certain way at the right time and it clicks. And I just continued, and my husband was spiraling. He was relapsing left and right. And I was trying to keep myself and our son safe. And there were a lot of really difficult days. And there were a lot of days of just, insanity and just it was a really rough time. And I was blown away by how I was able to stay stable within
Yeah.
because I wasn't trying to control him.
Yeah, I wonder, I just had this thought. I wonder if as you stopped controlling, like released him, it's almost like when you were trying to control him, you were enabling him to stay in his story, but you were also kind of keeping him from spiraling. That when you kind of called back
Mhm.
your own energy and just allowed him to be his own person, then he spiraled in that direction and you got stronger in who you were, who you are, and getting to know yourself.
Yeah. Now, I have to say that I also need to credit Al-Anon, which for anyone who doesn't know is a 12-step program for people who love the alcoholic or the addict. And, it's a very specific flavor of pain. Um, and in Al-Anon, I was listening to an Al-Anon speaker one day, and she said, detaching with love means
Mhm.
that you let the other person have the dignity of their own journey.
Whoa.
A-
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, whoa, so I was getting input from different places about this idea of let him have his journey. And just like you said, like he may need to spiral in order to get to wherever he's supposed to get.
Right.
It's not my journey. And I know that, a lot of people struggle with like, but it's my business, it's my husband. And in the material world, that might be true, but in the spiritual world, it's not.
Right.
And
And
when I live in the spiritual world, I'm at
yeah.
peace.
Yes, yes, yes. And there's also something I think about giving yourself the permission to not always have to make it work out in what we're
Yeah.
told working out, I'm doing air quotes, working out is, which is like working out is saving the marriage. And this is one thing that I really respect and love in the solo amorous journey, which I have also had at times too, is that working out is honoring myself and getting to know myself and getting myself to a stronger place so that I can either choose, I can then be at a conscious choice of whether I want to go into another relationship or I want to stay single. But it's like, making the foundation of who you are solid and strong. And that doesn't always have to be by making a marriage work or like forcing it to work, you know?
Yeah. So what ended up, I mean, I agree 100%. So when you are, soloamorous, you are focused on what is your truth. And when you're living out your truth, you really can't make a mistake.
Mm.
And so what ended up happening was we were together for a little while longer. I don't remember exactly, maybe close to a year or something. And I was working on myself, detaching with love, releasing him of expectations, still in pain, clearly. I mean, my husband's on drugs, I'm human, but really stable. And the day came where I found out firsthand that he was having an affair.
Mm-hmm.
And that day, I instantly just fell out of love and was done.
Wow.
Was done. Yeah, because I'm in recovery. So I had a lot of compassion and understanding for the addiction piece. I'm sure at some point I would have left him over that, but I wasn't quite at the point where I would leave him over that. I was at the point where I was about to give him an ultimatum, like, you need to go to a 6-month program away or something like that. But when I overheard him talking to another woman, I was done. I mean, it was so instantaneous. And because I was so connected to myself, because I had done months of work of honoring my truth and not needing him to be different, it wasn't hard. It really wasn't hard.
Uh-huh. It sounds like it was just an immediate, like, oh, that's the piece of information that I needed to make this change.
Yeah. And I had been praying for it for 8 months. Every night I asked God for clarity with this marriage. And if there's one thing I've learned about prayer, is that prayer works best when you don't put a timeline on the answer.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So, I have a strong relationship with God, and I trust that God answers my prayers in one way or another, either through giving me what I want or through giving me something better. Or through giving me what I need, but most importantly on his time. And so I just kept praying. And, I thought the answer would come through something that had to do with his addiction or something. And I overheard him on the phone with another woman, and I heard him saying specific things that made it very clear. And I just had this moment of, oh, this is totally different situation than I thought it was. Yeah. And I was done. And I said to him, I was on my way. This is crazy. I was on my way out the door to a week-long family vacation up in the Poconos. The baby was already strapped in the car. The car was packed with a week's worth of stuff. And if you've got a week's worth of stuff, you've got a life's worth of stuff, And I mean, he was in the car, strapped in. The car was on. I was leaving. My husband was not invited because he wasn't sober. And I had left my big blue water bottle that I take everywhere in the house. And I'm sitting there in the car and I'm like, ugh, I can't go to the Poconos for a week without this water bottle. I refill it like 17 times a day. And I left the car on with the baby in the car, and I ran back in the house real quick. And I heard the water running like in the shower. And because the shower was running, he didn't hear me come in, and he wasn't in the shower yet. He was in the bathroom on the phone about to get in the shower. And I heard him on the phone, and I put my ear up to the door, and that's when I heard it. And so the way that God brewed it was that when I received the information, I had my baby already strapped into the car with everything that I would need to leave, with the car running, ready to go.
I have chills with that.
It was crazy
how it was all lined up for you to have the ease to make a really, really hard, but I know easy in that moment decision of like, everything is lined up for me. This is how it is meant to be. And your prayer was answered. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Wow. Powerful.
Yeah. Real, yeah. So in that moment, I said to him, be out by the time I get back. I was leaving for a week. I took my wedding ring off and threw it out the window on the way up to the Poconos, somewhere in the woods. And I went on my bank account app and moved all the money because, he was on drugs. And I blocked his number because I needed that week. And I showed up to a family, like when I say family, like, brother, sister-in-law, cousins, to a family vacation with no husband and no ring on. And people were like, what's going on?
Well, you know what? This is a great transition because the next thing I wanted to ask you about is your family and your childhood and what you grew up seeing in terms of relationships. What, from your youngest memory up through maybe like preteen, what do you remember seeing around you in terms of intimate relationships, marriage, anything like that?
Yeah. So my parents are divorced now. They got divorced when I was 17. They were together for 20 years. From what I understand, the first 10 years were really good. I was a little too young to remember. And the second 10 years were not so great. I was the only girl and I was the oldest, and my mom and I were very, very, very close. And my parents had a pretty tumultuous marriage, at least in the second half, the part that I remember. And my parents are so different from each other. I sometimes don't even know how they got together. My mom is very emotional, very touchy-feely, very loving, very, give me lots of hugs and kisses and tell me everything about your life, which is great. She's awesome. And my dad is like the opposite of that. My dad shows love through providing. He shows love through safety. He was in the Israeli military in 2 wars in Israel. And his way of showing love is, let's make sure you're protected. Let's make sure you're safe. Let's make sure you have a warm winter coat and warm winter shoes. Let's make sure your bank accounts are safe. Like, that's how he shows love. And my mom shows love through literally giving you hugs and kisses and wanting to know everything. I mean, just so different. So, my mom and I were very enmeshed. And when my parents would fight, my mom inappropriately would come to me about it from a very young age. And my dad would see this and he felt very uncomfortable with it. And when he was mad at my mom, he was also mad at me. And I remember from a very young age, my dad would ignore me for 2 or 3 months at a time while we lived in the same house. Because remember, they didn't get divorced till I was pretty much leaving for college. And so the pattern was parents would get together, get along for a short period of time. Everything seemed okay. I had 2 younger brothers. And then my parents would be mad at each other. My mom would be crying and very upset. My dad would get really cold and distant. We would sit down for Shabbat dinner and he would sit there and bury his head in the soup and not say a word and then disappear downstairs to his office. And my mom would just be really sad. And then he wouldn't talk to me for a couple of months, sometimes something to do with my mom, sometimes just because, I was a teenage girl saying things that a teenage girl said. And, I had an attitude. And then at some point, he and I would always end up having some kind of big talk. And we would talk for hours. And we would fight and I would cry and we would find reconciliation and we would be really good for a week or 2. And then the pattern would start all over again. Yeah.
And how long did that pattern last? And is that anything you feel like you might have, worked on? I don't know if he was even in that place to be able to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it lasted for as long as I was living under my parents' roof. Fast forward to when I was in graduate school, when I was 23, I was taking a DSM class. I was a therapist for a long time. And so I was getting my master's in social work and I was taking a DSM class, which is basically when you learn about all the diagnoses. And I was reading about a particular diagnosis. And I broke into tears because it was my father to a T. Wow. And you needed 4 out of the 7 characteristics to diagnose, and he had 7 out of the 7. Wow. I mean, his picture and my parents were divorced at this point. His picture should have been next to this particular diagnosis. And I sent it to my mom, and she broke down in tears. And I never said anything to my dad about that. It wasn't really appropriate. But what changed my entire relationship with my dad was that the next day I went to class and I came to my professor crying. And remember, this is graduate school. Like, it's not appropriate to go to your teacher crying, but it was that strong of a situation. And I like laid it in front of him and told him all the things. And he was like, yep, sounds like it. And I was like, well, what do I do now? Like, what do I do with this? How do I fix it? You know? And he said to me, if your dad had one leg and he lived on the fourth floor and there was no elevator, how would you expect him to come down to you?
Oh, wow.
And I said, yeah. And I said, well, I wouldn't. I would go up to him. And he said, exactly.
Whoa.
He said, I want you to hear this differentiation. It's not that your father has two legs and he's choosing not to use them. It's that he only has one leg. He doesn't have the capacity to come down to you. And always remember that you're the one with two legs.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah. And we were still not good, my dad and I, at that point. And I remember we were still having these big conversations. I went 6 hours away to college and we would still have this pattern, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember a week or two later, he and I was back in Philly for graduate school. And I remember that he and I sat down for one of our big talks a couple weeks later. And I don't remember anything. It was, 15 years ago, but my energy was different. I didn't need him to be different.
What? That's a pattern, right? Okay, so we're seeing these patterns start to form, and this idea of like not needing someone else to be different, and then therefore being released yourself individually. Mm-hmm. Okay, yep. So let's hold on to that, and then I want to move forward a little bit in your relationship life in terms of teenage, early adulthood. What were your intimate relationships like during that time?
I mean, I was, a young, fun, pretty girl, and I had some fun. My first boyfriend was in high school. We fell in love. I was a year older than him. I went to college 6 hours away. We couldn't really deal with the distance thing, but it was like healthy. It was fine. Through my 20s, I had a couple of actually really healthy relationships, because I was healthy. I was healthy. I was healthy for most of my adult life. And then addiction struck me. I was a little bit of a late bloomer. And, I won't tell that whole story just for the sake of time. But in my late 20s, I really fell victim to opiate addiction. And I was on drugs for a few years and, of course, immersed out of that very unhealthy. Enter my husband.
Right.
So it's not a coincidence that I entered into the only truly unhealthy relationships. I say relationships because I also entered into relationships while I was in active addiction that, to be honest with you, I barely even remember, but that were very toxic. But the one in sobriety was my husband. And when you stop doing drugs, it's not like all of a sudden you're a healthy person. You've just removed the block so that you can become a healthy person. And I met him in AA when I was 6 weeks sober.
Oh.
And so it's no coincidence that in my 20s, I was a very healthy person and had healthy relationships. And then in my 30s, when I came out of addiction and went into recovery, I was not healthy yet and entered into an unhealthy relationship.
Right. And what do you think in kind of the overarching like vision of your life and what you're wanting to learn? And you've said you're a seeker, you always are seeking out information. And what do you think that the experience of going through your own personal addiction, coming into the let's go back even further, the relationship with your father and what you witnessed with your parents, and then going through these healthy relationships, and then falling into addiction on your own, and then getting into the relationship with your husband, coming out of that relationship and being single. So like that whole thing, what do you feel like was some of the biggest lessons that you were learning in that whole journey that has led you to this moment of saying, I want to be on my own. I want to be here on my own right now. What do you think some of those lessons were?
Um, I would say a big lesson is that dishonesty leads to more dishonesty.
Mm.
And that when I would not show my true self, my true feelings, my true thoughts to a partner, that would spiral into more and more of that.
Mm.
And that it was difficult for me to come out of. Now, I learned how to do that, and that's actually what I do with other women now.
Right.
But yeah, so that's a big one. And so I felt the need to really get to know myself better so that I could then be authentic with other people.
Right, because it wasn't only that you were being dishonest with other people, you were being dishonest with yourself.
Definitely. Yeah.
Mhm.
Like I would tell myself, oh, that doesn't bother me.
Right.
Like the first lie wasn't really a lie. I mean, it was, but it was a lie to me and then eventually I was like, well, but actually there's a fire in my stomach. So, maybe I'm not so cool with it. Yeah. So that's one lesson. I think another lesson would be that I need to fill up my cup in a way that works for me in order to show up in a way that serves my relationships.
Mm.
So for me personally, that's, prayer, meditation. AA is a big part of that for me. Coaching is a big part of that for me. Alone time. And I learned how to fill that cup while I was still married. And I've just continued with that even more intensely as a single person. Just really, really learning that when I am at my best, when I engage in things that are energy producing as opposed to energy draining,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
everyone benefits, especially my child.
Mm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm curious, because you're getting to such a healthy place, right? It's like you're getting to know yourself, you're getting to know in this, solo amorous structure, as we're calling it. Um, what do you vision for wanting? Are you at a place where you feel like there's something else that you're wanting, or do or do you feel just really happy in this moment and this is where you are? And it can be both, but just curious what your biggest visions for yourself and relationships are.
Yeah, I'm perfectly happy where I am right now. I do think I will remarry.
Mhm.
I hopefully, if God allows it, will have another child.
Mhm.
Um, I am 100% certain that when I get into a relationship again, it will only add to my life and I will only add to theirs.
Yeah.
Like there is no chance that I am going to get into a relationship without being my true self,
Mm.
without having difficult conversations in the beginning
Mhm.
about values,
Mhm.
about visions, about desires, about non-negotiables.
Mm.
And I will show up in those conversations with courage and with honesty.
Mm.
And I am 100% certain of that because I have practiced showing up for myself over and over and over, while married, while not married. Over and over and over, I have practiced what it looks like to show up for myself. That means that when I say I'm going to do something, I do it.
Mhm.
That means that when I say something, I mean it. That means that when I need self-care, I honor that. It means that when I don't need the self-care, I don't make an excuse that I do in order to not work. It
Absolutely.
means that I hold myself to a standard that is something to be proud of. And because I've done that work, I know that that's what I'll attract.
Mhm.
And I know that that's all that I will accept.
Yeah, and I love what you said about practicing because it does take practice. It's like
Yeah.
we think sometimes, oh, I'm just going to do this. It's going to encode into me within, one time. But I think, like, especially when we're in a enmeshed relationship where we're giving up so much of ourselves, you know, for someone else, that comes from someplace. And we have to reprogram ourselves in and like viscerally reprogram ourselves by coming back to it and coming back to it and
Yeah.
practicing it.
Yeah.
Just like you say, that's really, really important.
Yeah.
And I think that, when you get to the place where that is more who you are, then the other is that's when you start to open yourself up to the kind of relationship that you know that you deserve. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. And this work can be done whether you're single or married. Like
Absolutely.
the heavy lifting was done while I was married, it can be done either way. And I think that both ways serve a benefit.
Yeah, and that's why I like to talk about diversity in terms of relationship structure. The old school thinking is we need to fit it into a box. If I'm solo amorous, well then I'm going to be on my own and I want to be on my own forever and I have to do all this work on my own and I have to, and there's so much of this beautiful colors, in between. So
Mm-hmm.
the idea of being able to bring some of these practices, whatever relationship structure you're in, I think could be really helpful to someone. Attached to that is there's a lot of cultural and societal programming about being single or choosing to be single. So, what is one kind of cultural or societal belief that you want to speak to that you maybe had heard, or that someone out there might be listening and saying, well, I'm scared to be single because people say that single people have this experience, but that you want to kind of bust through that programming to shed more light on?
Definitely the single parenthood part.
Tell me more.
Definitely. So, I mean, I'm what's called a solo parent. Unfortunately, my son's father has not been around for a couple years now. He is very sick and we're not sure where he is.
Mhm.
So, when I don't tell that to everyone unless they really ask, but people know that it's just me raising my kid. And sometimes people will kind of like cock their head to the side with like pity on their face and be like, oh my God, that's so hard. And I always say, no, it's not. Like it's not hard unless you decide it's going to be hard. Because there are, I know that this isn't everybody's specific situation, but like you can find silver linings in anything. Or, okay, let me say it this way. My parents stayed together for the kids.
Mm.
That whole thing is
Mhm.
bull.
Uh-huh.
That is what I'd really like to bust through. My parents stayed together for the kids, and I think it harmed the kids.
That is so powerful. I understand that completely. And
Yeah.
that is, the kids know. Kids can feel it, right?
Kids know. Yeah. I mean, my parents weren't so quiet about it, but even the parents who are quiet about it, yeah, the kids absolutely know. And then what happens is you end up getting divorced later when the kids are older. And like me and my one brother, we were like, I was out the door pretty much. He was halfway out the door, but my youngest brother was 12. And
Mhm.
he really got the brunt of it because he was 12. It's like a
Yeah.
really, yeah, I know
That's
that's,
the
I
age
know.
I was.
Right, right. And it's like that age is rough. And when you have to deal with your parents getting divorced at 12, that's tough. And listen, I understand that it's a really difficult decision. And I'm not saying that people should, get divorced because the kids are younger. I'm just saying that kids thrive when they have happy parents, regardless of whether they're together or not.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that. What are the things that you love about the solo parent journey?
Oh my God, I love it. First of all, just, I mean, okay. So first of all, there's one parent and one child in the house.
Mm,
I don't have words to tell you how strong that bond is.
yeah.
There are no other dynamics. that are playing a part right now.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have, my husband was around until my son was 15 months old. Like that has been a part before. But it's not anymore. And it gives us the ability to create a routine that is just ours. That doesn't need to be swayed because there's something going on with anyone else.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. I'll tell you, in my marriage, that's something that my husband and I deal with, because we have different, priorities. We have different priorities in terms of just scheduling and how we want to keep the kids on task during the day, or, definitely.
Yeah.
Different. So I hear you with that one.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing is, I get to make decisions that align with me, and I don't have to check in with anyone. Yeah.
Yes. I love that. And I think that's really important for people to hear out there, because I know there's someone listening who is possibly in a relationship that doesn't feel aligned with who they are, and are scared to, with or without kids, are scared to make a different choice in terms of changing their relationship structure. What would you say to someone like that, who you remember being on that side, like maybe before that phone call that you heard? And what would you say to that person?
I would say, before you make a decision, align with yourself. Align with yourself. That's pretty much what I do in my relationship coaching. Is, people come to me wanting to stay together, and their goals are my goals. If you want to stay together, let's make it work. I'll help you feel more connected. I'll help you do all of that. I know how to do that. And it always starts with you aligning with you. Always. And from there, you can make a decision.
Right. So if someone's hearing that and saying, well, align with me, what would be one thing they could do to start that process?
I can think of a few things, but I think the thing that would be easiest for someone who hasn't done it at all would be to sit down and make a list of the things that are just non-negotiables.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. And if you're in that place that it's really challenging, you reach out to someone like Elana or someone like me, to help get some clarity and to help you. I know sometimes when I do vision sessions with people, and I just say, like, I'm just going to write down everything that you say. I don't care what you say. I have no judgments. Just tell me how you're feeling right now. And it may start pretty surface, but then it starts to get deeper and deeper and deeper, the more space that, I allow them to really seek and search and question and feel and be themselves. And sometimes I think people need that kind of advocate that is so laser focused on the person, on you, on what your needs are, what your wants are. And sometimes we just need to be given the permission to be able to feel and express it, right?
Yeah. And here's what ends up happening is, I help you become really aligned with yourself to the point where you learn how to have your own back in a loving, open way. And you learn how to start communicating confidently and respectfully. And you learn how to speak your truth. And you start to see that you will always have your own back, whether you're alone or not. And so the fear of being alone starts to lift. And because that starts to lift, you're actually able to engage with your partner more.
Wow. Isn't it? It's crazy how that works that way, because we're not taught that, right? So
right.
A total reprogramming of how we look at.
Because what's the reason that we don't tell our partner? I'll speak for me. There were lots of times where something was going on in my marriage that I agreed to, that I really didn't agree to. And why didn't I speak up? It was because I was afraid of conflict. I was afraid of possible rejection or judgment. I was afraid that I wouldn't be approved of. These are all basically different flavors of, I was afraid of not being accepted, which is like the opposite of being alone, right? That's really what it comes down to. And so when I was able to start saying, you know what, maybe I will be judged. Maybe I will be not approved of for whatever I'm saying. Maybe my husband will get mad and there will be some conflict. I'm willing to pay that price to feel aligned within myself.
Mm. That's so beautiful. That is so, so beautiful. And I think the whole world opens up when we align with ourselves. I love that. And I think that's, my biggest message with this podcast is to know yourself most intimately so that you can make the decisions, whether now or a month from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, what kind of relationship structure you want to be in, what will work the best for you, because we're all beautiful, unique beings, and we all express ourselves in different ways.
Yeah.
And so I guess, as we're wrapping up, I want to thank you for being so vulnerable and open with your story and sharing it, because I know that you have helped people by sharing your story. And the last thing I'll just ask is how do you express soloamory in your unique way? Like, what makes you unique in the way, using all the story that you've talked about, your whole story? How do you show yourself in the world as you, Elana, as you in, expressing yourself as a soloamorous in a soloamorous relationship, as you expressing yourself as the most intimate relationship with yourself? What is one way that it's maybe uniquely yours?
Well, I don't know if it's uniquely mine, but I don't know if it's unique to me, but I just show up as me no matter what.
Mm.
So like last night, I went out to dinner with 7 other moms from my son's school. Every single one of them is married.
Uh-huh.
Every single one of them, has multiple kids. Every single one, there were differences for sure. And I didn't try and morph myself at all. When you feel aligned with yourself on the inside, it naturally comes out of your pores. Like, you don't have to try.
Right.
Like, how you can tell how someone feels about themselves by the way they talk, by the way they walk, by the way they hold their, you can't fix that stuff from the outside.
Mm-mm.
It's an inside job. And the only other thing that I would say that is so, so important to me is that I get up 30 minutes before my son does every single morning to meet myself and my creator before I meet anybody else.
Yes.
And sometimes even 45 minutes, but let's not stretch it. I do have a toddler. He's not exactly sleeping in,
Right.
But yeah, and I take that time and I read a couple daily readers that really speak to me, and I pray and I talk to God and I meditate. And, some days I'm really feeling it and some days I'm not, but I keep the habit to give myself the opportunity to continue feeling it. And I have made a very conscious decision that I will always start my day by meeting myself and my creator alone before I meet anyone else, even my child.
That is so powerful. And I know that whenever you do meet, go into the next relationship, I just hear the power and the confidence in your voice that is a ritual that will be sticking with you for your life and into a partnership.
Yeah.
If that's what you choose.
Yeah. I will be bringing soloamory into monogamy.
I love it. That's what I'm talking about. Yes. Yes. I love that. So, anything else that you would want to speak to that person that you feel is listening to you? Anything else that you would want to say? Any last words?
I think I'd want to say that whatever it is that you're afraid of working through, I want you to know that you should be more afraid of not working through it.
Wow.
It's worth it. It's worth it. And you don't have to do it alone. There are people who can help you, people like Carrie and I, other people. There's also communities there. You don't have to do it alone. Everything that you think that you're going through that is unique to you, it's not. You're just going through it in your head. So you think it is. Whatever you think is different or special about your circumstance, it's not. And the work looks the same. That's why I can pretty much help anyone with any relationship issue, because there's like 5 core issues.
Yes.
And every issue that's showing up in your marriage comes down to one of those 5 core issues.
It's so true.
Yeah. And so I would say, whatever the fear is, get someone to help you work through that fear, because really you should be more afraid of not working through it.
Yes. Powerful words to end with. Absolutely. And I agree. It's I never sugarcoat it. I think it's a courageous journey. And it is really the thing that is going to create the most permanent change in your life, and to create permanent changes in all your relationships, whether intimate, familial, friendship, any of those.
Definitely.
Yeah. So Elana, if people want to reach out to you to maybe start working with you, how would they get in touch with you?
Yeah. So everything is under Partnership Aligned. So my podcast is called Partnership Aligned. My website is partnershipaligned.com. Instagram is where I do most of my daily work. You can find me at Partnership Aligned. I have some free resources on there that you can come and download. And you can email me, Elana, ELANA, at partnershipaligned.com.
Awesome. We're going to put all of that in the show notes too. So it is easily clickable and they can connect right with you.
Great.
Awesome. Elana, thank you so much for this, for sharing your story, and for inspiring all of us in the practice of Soloamory.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Relationship Diversity Podcast. Want to learn more about relationship diversity? I've got a free guide I'd love to send you. Go to www.relationshipdiversitypodcast.com to get yours sent right to you. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast. You being here and participating in the conversation about relationship diversity is what helps us create a space of inclusivity and acceptance together. The more comfortable and normal it is to acknowledge the vast and varied relating we all do, the faster we'll shift to a paradigm of conscious, intentional, and diverse relationships. New episodes are released every Tuesday and Thursday. Stay connected with me through my website, carriejaroslow.com, Instagram, and TikTok. Stay curious. Every relationship is as unique as you are. Wondering why you never seem to find lasting fulfillment in your relationships? Or do you create the same kinds of relationship experiences over and over again? Can you never seem to find even one person who you want to explore a relationship with? Have you just given up hope altogether? If this sounds like you, my recent book, Why Do They Always Break Up With Me, is the perfect place to start. The foundation of any relationship, whether intimate or not, is the relationship we have with ourselves. In the book, I lead you through 8 clear steps to start or continue your self-exploration journey. You'll learn about the importance of self-acceptance, gratitude, belief shifting, and forgiveness, and given exercises to experience these life-changing concepts. This is the process I use to shift my relationships from continual heartbreak to what they are now, fulfilling, soul-nourishing, compassionate, and loving. It is possible for you. This book can set you on a path to get there. Currently available through Amazon or through the link in the show notes.